Okay, let's just dive right into it. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be looking at one of the absolute most famous moments in all of literature. But more importantly, we're going to decode what it really tells us about society. Because we're looking at a story that literally changed the world, but we need to examine it through the lens of the deeply flawed system that actually created it.
Please, sir, I want some more. You've likely heard this iconic line before. It's been echoing through pop culture for over a century now. But today, we're going to really explore the explosive historical context that forced a starving orphan to stand up and say those exact words. It wasn't just a simple request for food, right? It was a full-on collision with a brutal institution.
So, our explainer has to begin with the man behind the words, Charles Dickens. Widely regarded as the greatest novelist of the Victorian era, Dickens wasn't just spinning tall tales for fun. He was a fierce social critic. And what makes this so compelling is that Dickens actually used his own lived experiences to expose the cruel treatment of orphans in mid-19th century London. I mean, the guy was forced to work in a rat-infested shoe-blacking factory at age 12, while his father was locked up in debtor's prison. So right in the heart of industrial-age England, he managed to write a central character full of gentility and empathy despite the absolute horrors surrounding him.
Now, to really understand the story, we first have to understand the powder keg itself, and that is the workhouse. This was an unforgiving institution designed to house the destitute. Simply put, it was a building for poor people who had absolutely no money and literally nowhere else to go. But, and this is absolutely crucial, this was no charity home. It was basically a place of punishment for being poor.
Oliver Twist's life begins tragically right here in this bleak environment. He is born in the workhouse to a young, unnamed woman. The text tells us she was brought in the night before and she had walked so far that her shoes actually had holes in them. Nobody knew where she came from, nobody knew where she was going. Exhausted, she just looks up from her pillow and whispers, "Let me see the child and die."
This moment brilliantly illustrates the era's complete and utter lack of empathy. The doctor puts the child in her arms. The young mother presses her cold, white lips to the newborn's face, and then she falls back. The doctor simply states she is dead. There's no grand mourning, no pause to reflect on the tragedy of a lost life. It's just over.
Yeah, the doctor doesn't mourn at all. He simply brushes off her tragic death. He raises her left hand, notices there's no wedding band, and casually dismisses her entire existence as, quote, the usual story. He literally just says goodnight and leaves. This immediately establishes the grim, callous, heavily judgmental reality of the world young Oliver has just entered. He is born into a world that has absolutely zero love or pity for him.
And get this, what's truly fascinating is how the workhouse officer, this self-important man named Mr. Bumble, completely strips these infants of any humanity. Since no one knew Oliver's parents, Mr. Bumble simply invents a name, using a totally arbitrary A to Z naming system. He proudly explains that he names the new babies in alphabetical order. The last one was Swubble, this one is Twist, the next one will be Unward.
So what was life actually like for young Twist growing up? Well, by the age of 9, Oliver and his friends were pale, thin children. They were dressed in the exact same very old clothes used for workhouse babies. They never had enough warm clothes, and they definitely never had enough food. They survived on just 3 meals of thin soup a day, with a single small piece of bread acting as a huge luxury on Sundays. The bowls never even needed washing, because the boys would clean them with their spoons until they literally shone. They were trapped in a desperate, continuous state of starvation.
Dickens brilliantly heightens this tragedy by drawing an incredible visual contrast for the reader. On one side, you have the workhouse boys, pale, thin, given exactly one small bowl of thin soup and nothing more. And then, on the other side, you have the master serving them, a fat, incredibly healthy man standing beside a massive pot of food. The inequality is glaring. It's just deeply unjust.
Eventually, driven mad by hunger, the stakes escalate dramatically. One day, a taller boy makes a horrific announcement. He warns the others that unless he gets extra gruel, he is actually going to eat the small boy who sleeps next to him. Just think about the sheer desperation required for a child to make a threat like that. Terrified, the boys hold a secret council. A decision is made. Someone has to walk up to the master after supper and ask for more. They draw lots, and little Oliver Twist is the one chosen.
So, evening finally rolls around. The boys sit down at the tables in the big hall. The fat master serves the soup, and of course it disappears in a flash. The boys start whispering. They're making frantic signs at Oliver. The pressure is really on. He stands up from the table, his bowl and spoon trembling in his hands, and he starts walking towards the master. And he delivers the line, "Please, sir, I want some more."
The crucial takeaway here is that this simple, polite, incredibly basic request for sustenance is the literal spark that drops directly into the powder keg of the workhouse system, because it challenges the entire established hierarchy of this cruel institution.
And the reaction from the adults? It is swift, hysterical, and totally disproportionate. The fat, healthy master, who, remember, has all the power and all the food, suddenly goes completely pale himself. He stares in utter surprise at this tiny boy. He quietly says, "What?" And when Oliver actually repeats the request, the master absolutely snaps. He hits Oliver with his spoon, grabs him, and actually cries out for help. Let that sink in for a second. A grown man crying for help because a starving child asked for some more soup. Mr. Bumble immediately rushes into the room when he hears the master crying out. And when he's told what Oliver did, Mr. Bumble views this request as an unforgivable crime against the natural order of things. He literally cries out, "I cannot believe it. One day they will hang the boy." Requesting the basic calories needed to survive is equated to a capital offense. To them, it's a crime that will surely lead Oliver straight to the gallows.
Because the system simply cannot tolerate this kind of defiance, Oliver is subjected to severe punishment. He becomes a prisoner in a cold, dark room for an entire week, and the psychological terror is compounded by physical abuse. Every single morning he's taken outside to wash, where Mr. Bumble beats him with a stick. Then he's dragged into the large hall and beaten in front of all the other boys as a warning. He spends his days crying, cold, lonely, and profoundly frightened.
Eventually, the workhouse authorities decide they simply must rid themselves of this rebellious child once and for all. So, a notice goes up on the high workhouse gate. They offer a £5 reward to anybody who will take Oliver Twist off their hands. Think about that. They are literally willing to pay money just to eject a child who had the audacity to ask for enough food to survive.
Ultimately, Mr. Bumble meets a man outside the gate and sells Oliver's apprenticeship to him for those £5. The man is Mr. Sowerberry, who's described as a tall, thin man dressed in black. And in a stroke of absolute dark irony from Dickens, Mr. Sowerberry is a coffin-maker. He makes the coffins for the very poor people who die in the workhouse. Mr. Bumble actually tells him he's going to be rich one day because of all the deaths, and just hands Oliver over to this incredibly grim fate.
So Dickens brilliantly used a starving boy's simple request to expose the hypocrisy and the sheer cruelty of his era. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought to chew on. If the institutional lack of empathy Dickens wrote about was the defining shame of the 19th century, where do those systemic echoes exist in our own modern world? If a modern Dickens were writing today, what marginalized group hidden away in our own bureaucratic blind spots would be asking us for just a little bit more? Really think about that and keep exploring.